Hello, everybody. Welcome to this afternoon session at PyCon 2014. My name is Chris Lafra. I will be your session chair for the next 3 talks. The first speaker I'm going to introduce is Michael DeHaan with a really nice Dutch name, but he says he's not really Dutch, but I think that's scores already. And the presentation will be on automating with Ansible.
Right. Thank you very much, guys. Thanks for coming out. So just for show of hands before we start, how many people are already using Ansible today? Wow, that's a really cool crowd. Thanks. So because we got a lot of users that are using things and are not using things, I'm going to try to make this a little bit of something for everybody. So we're going to give you a little bit of the intro information, also some of the new things, and for existing users, hopefully you'll get to know a little bit more about how we think, why Ansible is the way it is, and so on. I'd also mention we're doing an open space tonight for people that want to come hang out with some other Ansible users. It's going to be 6 o'clock tonight upstairs in 525, so you go up all the way around the back, like really all the way around the back, and hope to see some of you out at 6. So just to give you a little background about how Ansible came to be. I've been doing data center automation software for a good 12, 13 years or something like that. Most significantly, worked for Red Hat's Emerging Technologies group for a while, which was a fantastic experience. And one of the tools there I built was called Cobbler. So Cobbler helps you Pixie and do DHCP management, DNS management, and handle basically bare metal provisioning. And while I was doing that, there was a lot of interest in automating the rest of the configuration, obviously. So CF Engine was a thing. Puppet was gaining prominence. Chef was just coming onto the scene. And these were all really good tools, and I got to watch our Cobbler users use them and how that evolved. I actually spent a little bit of time working for Puppet Labs for a while. It was a good experience. But as I came to work for more places that were doing hosted web applications, I noticed that there was complexity overhead, but also that there were certain things that I wanted to be able to automate that I still couldn't automate well. So that has included multi-tier application deployments where I might want to move between one particular set of servers and another, and then go back and forth. That was one use case. And another one was zero downtime rolling updates. So if I'm working with 500 servers across a load balance configuration and I want to update 50, take them out of the pool before I update them, take them out of monitoring, signal and outage window, update them, put them back in, and keep doing that moving down the line. That's a very hard process for many people to get, and everybody kind of has to build their own things. So what I wanted to do is provide an off-the-shelf way for people to do that, and that's kind of how the idea for Ansible got started. So at a little bit higher level, what is Ansible? So Ansible foremost is an application deployment system. So you've got some software that you've written. Help me get it out to all my servers so that I can use it in the wild. Configuration management. This is probably the phrase that most people are familiar with as well. Usually deals with configuring the files on a server, what services are running, maybe the security configuration, and all of those things. And traditionally, in many configurations, people have used separate configuration management systems and separate application deployment systems. And this is something that, with Ansible, I was trying to eliminate because there was a cognitive switch, right, moving between configuration management and application deployment. So instead of having to take my config system and then run some other scripts on top to deploy, I want to have everything fully configured, fully provisioned in a single pass. Cloud provisioning is also a feature of Ansible, so we have lots of modules to interact with and create new nodes, and whether that's EC2, whether that's Rackspace, whether that's DigitalOcean, whether that's OpenStack, you can request a new VM and have it fully configured at the end of an Ansible run, and write very, very simple text-based configuration to describe those deployments. So the one thing that's really nice, we're going to get to a little bit, is Ansible is by default SSH-based, and SSH is cloud native, right? So all of these cloud APIs allow you to say, spin up this image, but inject this SSH key into it, so you don't need to install any existing software, and you can instantly start managing that remote machine. And ad hoc task execution, so everything that fits in between the cracks. Like, I just need to reboot these servers now. I don't know how many people out here were affected by Heartbleed. Like, everyone, right? You don't even need to raise your hand. A really good way to solve that problem of how to update my OpenSSL and modify my certificates, whatever I need to do, is write a really simple one-off playbook that I'm just going to run this one time. It's not maybe even going to be part of my regular configuration. But Ansible is really good at describing all those IT tasks that fit in between the cracks. Like you can even just use the command line to say, go do this on all my machines right now, which is not a new thing, but it can be very useful at times. And we talked about continuous deployment, about rolling updates and multi-tier orchestration, right? So the idea that I'm not just configuring just my web servers or just my database servers, but they're not only configured in a specific order, but they need to know information about each other. And I might need to do certain things on one server using the information from another on behalf of another. So those are things that Ansible is kind of designed to help with. So just to talk a little bit about our philosophy and how things work, some of the major ideas behind things. First off, Ansible is agentless. So when we manage nodes over SSH, what we do is we reach out to them, deploy the remote nodes by shipping little modules to them. So we don't think of SSH as logging in and running chmod plus X, right? Or chmod 7.7 or whatever. We actually use it as a transport channel to deploy descriptions of software to the remote servers. And from there, actually configure it. So what that allows us to do is avoid the problem of having to maintain a large management infrastructure fleet. So that additional set of open daemons can be consuming resources on your remote machines. So it's not uncommon for some tools to be consuming 400 megs of RAM just for the management software. And if you think about in a rack with 8 or 12 virtual machines, how quickly that adds up, there's a cost savings there. Consumes CPU, and can also be potentially an additional security thing to keep track of, additional dealing with firewalls and all that kind of stuff. SSH is the stock thing that we all expect to have. So Ansible has a very, very finely tuned SSH implementation to make that all possible. We strongly believe that automation shouldn't be your day job. There probably are people that write Ansible all day, but when I created it because I actually wanted to write more code, and not automation code. So I was briefly working for a major North American hardware vendor, and I was supposed to be a core contributor in OpenStack, but we had spent, as an organization, 6 or 7 months on a particular automation tool's deployment, and we were still rearranging it every day. So what had happened is the automation had become my own day job, and we're all here at PyCon. We're mostly all developers and ops people that have other interests. There's other things we want to do. So the idea is Ansible should make your life simple, and then you should be able to move on and do other things. And those things might be development, it might be strategic IT projects, it might be trying out this new data store, but to keep everything really simple and enable that to happen. And part of keeping things simple, as I said, is audibility. So the idea that an Ansible playbook is really just a list of things to do means that it can be read by people who don't even understand Ansible, and that makes it more transparent and obvious what's going on. It's line by line oriented, so your get commit messages or whatever source control you're using are a really good record of what's going on, and it's really easy to maneuver and refactor and change. And then finally, this is actually out of date. I think the number is actually like 235 now. We have a very large number of modules in core, and modules to us are things like configuration of Django, configuration of Postgres, MySQL, all these things. We ship with a very, very large toolbox, like suitable for racing garages, right? Of all these things that you want to do, so you can put those together like Legos to handle all these things that you want to configure, and that's really, really nice because what that means is I'm starting from a higher plane, and I can get done faster, and I can move on to more interesting things. So just to share a little bit of statistics, Ansible is an open source project. It started about 2 years ago. Started on my couch as kind of a nights and weekends thing. But because I knew a lot of people from Fedora and CentOS and elsewhere from Cobbler and things like Funk, which we created at Red Hat, it grew really, really quickly. And a lot of people said, I was trying to build a system like this, but I just never did. So it took off really fast. Last year, we were number 5 for the most number of contributors on GitHub. So there, and the other up there with AngularJS, Rails, CocoaPods, and Homebrew. So we're really, really happy to see that, and it's been keeping us extremely busy, and it's been a very fun experience. Also, we're one of the top 10 Python projects on GitHub for numbers of stars and forks. So again, enormous activity there, and we add a new contributor less than every 1.3 days. So that's a new person coming along, adding a module. Maybe they're adding a new parameter to a module. Maybe it's just contributing to the documentation, but one of the things that I really, really love about Python, and I think this is the most important thing about it, right, is that it has this nice balance between something's really quickly to implement and something's really easy to maintain, something's really obvious for everybody else, and then it's also something that's very likely to be stable. So the idea that I wrote this as a prototype, but this code was so clean and understandable that I never actually even had to change it, and it was fine and perfect. And that kind of agility has been, I think, really key for Python and system software. So again, thanks everybody here today for making that kind of thing a thing. I want to talk a little about users, and we'll dive into examples. And the reason I'm doing this is because they kind of set some interesting examples. There's a lot of people here from edX today, so thanks very much. But both edX and Fedora infrastructure have open sourced all of their Ansible content that they're used to configuring themselves. So Fedora, obviously, the open source distribution that bleeds all the interestingness into Red Hat and CentOS and is a great OS in its own right. All their infrastructure is running Ansible, and you can check it out and see what they're doing and see all their content. Gawker is a nice case because, like I said, they're deploying 5 or 10 whatever times an hour without any downtime, with 50,000 users simultaneously hammering the site all day long, no matter what the time of day. And they're doing that using Ansible for rolling updates. We've got people using things for product installers. And then, Rackspace is orchestrating their production OpenStack rollouts. So there's a lot of really interesting cases of people using it in a lot of different ways. So Ansible is relevant whether you've got 10 servers or you've got 5,000. It doesn't really matter. The idea is that simplicity doesn't mean something's limited. What it means is that you can move faster and you can spend time on the things you want to spend time with. So getting into examples, this is kind of what Ansible looks like, right? The actual real juicy part. So inventory in Ansible is maintained by a simple INI file. Here we're describing a group of 2 servers, and we're saying that they're both web servers. And if I just wanted to talk to those servers, I can say web servers ping, and I get the response. And this is actually an SSH connectivity test, not an ICMP ping. But if I wanted to reboot all those servers, I can also say that in parallel. And this might be a good example of perhaps a go home for Christmas, shut down the lab script, right, in one line. The real magic of Ansible, though, comes in playbook. So this is our language that we describe how systems should look, policy and steps. So in this particular example, we're saying, talk to all my web servers. This is what we call a host specification, and apply certain roles to them. So we're saying, apply the base configuration, make this machine a web server, and then also install some monitoring agents. So the idea is this very simple description is human readable. So almost like if you think of like Cucumber and other things, that's obviously a Ruby thing, but it's an idea that the descriptions of your infrastructure should be very, very clear to people regardless of technical ability. What we saw here, for instance, web server was a role. Roles are a directory structure for packaging content and making it reusable. So we keep track of the tasks that are part of the role application, what templates it might apply, what files it might copy over, what default variables it might use in this very simple scaffolding. And this is what a task file looks like. Here we're saying, tell it using the package manager to say that a particular package must be installed. Here we're also copying a template to a remote server. Templates use Ginger 2 for templating, really nice templating engine. And we're saying if this file, this HTTP file has ever changed, restart the web server. And then finally, we're saying that the web server should be running. There's also a slight mistake in this last line. Not only should I make sure the web server is running, I should say enabled equals yes, so that the next time this machine reboots, it'll bring up the service automatically. So you can see that it's really, really human readable, not approaching code or anything, because I really want everybody to be able to spend time writing the code that they want to write, and then the automation should just be something that's already there. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can extend Ansible by writing Python, though, because obviously a lot of you here would want to do that. So that was kind of the very high-level quick run-through of Ansible. For those of you that thought I was going too fast, I encourage you to go to docs.ansible.com. There's a walkthrough there, and if you have about an hour, you can get your first playbook up and running and see how you like things. So even if you're using some other tool, check it out and see what you think, and you'll have an opinion. So just to share a few tips and tricks and new things, this is like one of the coolest things. We rolled this out about 2 or 3 months ago, but galaxy.ansible.com is a collection of Ansible roles. So if you want to figure out how to install Graphite or Logstash or any of the cool new hotnesses, you can go here And you can find community roles that have already been rated and reviewed by people. You can upload roles of your own, and it's just a really nice way to find things. When we designed Galaxy, we looked heavily towards like consumer sites. So if you think about like iTunes or Flickr, or we actually like beeradvocate.com, and they have a very nice rating structure, right? So how do you help people drill through mountains of content where they have lots of choices? So if there's three roles for configuring Varnish, for instance, or Nginx, how do I find the good ones? And you can rate and review and find things. The Ansible Galaxy init command line tool also create that scaffolding for that role structure. So even if you're not using Galaxy to download roles, it can help you pre-create those even for your local work. But if I want to install something I found on Galaxy, I just say Ansible-Galaxy install username.rolename, and it'll download it. Galaxy's backed by GitHub, so if all the content is hosted by them, and we just basically have a metadata index of how to find all the good stuff. So definitely worth checking out. Ansible Vault is also a really nice tool. This was added in the last release. Ansible Vault allows you to store encrypted data in your playbooks. So you can create a data file. In Ansible, all data files use YAML format. They can also be in JSON, but we prefer YAML. And what it allows me to do is it allows me to specify a password. So it'll store it encrypted in version control. So I'm able to have those secrets protected. But when you run Ansible, you can tell it to decrypt that content in memory. And so that's a great way to keep maybe, say, your AWS secret key without keeping it in version control. So that can be really, really useful. Again, that was part of the recent 1.5 release, and is a pretty nice example of some new things in Ansible. Rolling updates I talked about. So this is what a rolling update looks like. Here I'm using a very abstract example of what talking to a load balancer would look like. We've actually got modules in core for dealing with F5s and NetScalers. For those of you on physical infrastructure, there's modules for EC2, ELBs, also for rack-space load balancers, and it's easy for take more. We always encourage contribution back to the project for people that want to add new modules for new services. But here what we're doing is we're talking to each web server and we say the batch size is 5. So take 5 machines out of the load balancer at a time, right? Apply the common role, the web server role, and install my monitoring agents or reconfigure them as needed. And when I'm done, put them back in. What I have here with the load balancer example could also be expanded. It could signal an outage window. I might want to notify a particular monitoring service that I'm doing an upgrade. But what I've done in that, basically that half page of text, is describe my entire rolling update. So there's more complexity in the role, but Ansible will walk down my servers 5 at a time. I could choose 50 at a time, whatever I wanted, and update them. So that's a great way to achieve continuous integration, which is obviously a very popular thing to do. So you might run this against a stage environment, and if this succeeds, decide to run that against production. And you too can update your software infrastructure, whether it's your Django apps, whatever you want, every however many minutes. Ansible, just to be clear, is not just for Python. People actually use it to deploy Rails apps, Java apps, whatever you want. It has some useful modules for checking things out of source control. Has wrappers around rsync. Obviously support for all the package managers, and there's lots of interesting ways to do deployments. So to talk about how Ansible is extensible, obviously we're implemented in Python. The main thing is Ansible modules. So Ansible modules are things like the support for talking to Django, talking to Postgres, talking to MySQL or React or whatever kind of data store, managing files, almost everything in Ansible that does work. Like you saw me mention Yum and template. Those are modules, and they're user extensible plugins that are written in Python. Basically, they just have to return JSON, and there's a very user extensible base class that you use to write your own module and define what arguments it takes. The core modules are all Python, but you can actually write modules in other languages. So for instance, you could write it in Ruby or Perl. And if you're writing in Bash, you can actually, well, say returning JSON's too hard, you can just return key equals value pairs, 1 per line, and the system will also know what you mean. But there's also lots and lots of other types of plugins. Lookup plugins allow you to access external data stores. So some of the feed magnet guys are here today, and they gave a great presentation at the last Ansible Fest in Texas, where they have a looping across of users that are in their database and saying, these users should be on the system, these users should not be on the system. And they've basically written their own iterator in Ansible, which is a pretty cool thing to do. Connection plugins, how we talk to machines over SSH. If you decided you wanted to talk over radio or telnet, you can technically do that. I hope no one writes support for telnet. Action plugins are server-side modules. So the template module, for instance, evaluates the template server-side, so it gives a very minimal amount of information to the remote host. And that's important for data security reasons. We only show the host the minimal amount of data that it needs to see. But anything that happens server-side and talks to an API can also be done. So you're not just limited to configuring things on remote hosts. While it's not an action plugin, we can also do things like notify me an SMS message when I get to this particular step, or post a message to my team chat server. There's filter plugins, which are Jinja 2 things. If you don't know what that is, that's okay. And inventory is pluggable, so this is really a cool thing. So we have a lot of inventory scripts included where I could dynamically suck down the list of hosts from things like OpenStack, Amazon, Rackspace, DigitalOcean, Cobbler, whatever. If you have your own database, that's fine, but what that allows you to do is say, from this external source of truth, pull down all these variables, what hosts are in what groups. Like if we're using cloud services, it's usually based on tags. So I can say, for everything that is tagged web server, go apply this configuration. And that keeps you from having to maintain that INI inventory file I showed you earlier. And that can be written in any language as well. It just has to be an executable program that can return JSON. And all the core examples are written in Python, so you can dive in and see what's available and what you want to decide to work with. There's also an API. There's a Python API that Ansible is written in. It's kind of written in its own API, so the bin scripts use it. Ansible is a GPL v3 application, so you can download that and try that if you're interested. And we also have a commercial product, which I'm not going to talk too much about today, that gives you a REST API that you can talk to. It's using Django REST framework though, so if you're writing Django apps, Django REST framework is crazy awesome. Gives you this really nice graphical API browser, and we also found it to be very, very easy to extend. So we've built our RBAC system on top of that, and a bunch of other neat things, and it's been a joy to work with. So just to talk a little bit about internals, since this is kind of a developer event, right? Ansible requires Python 2.6 or higher on the remote server and 2.4 on the nodes. A lot of people will ask us, well, why not Python 3? And that's a valid question. To be honest, there's a lot of Python 2x systems out there, a lot of RHEL, a lot of CentOS. A lot of systems don't ship with Python 3 by default. And I think as that expects to change, we'll think about that. But right now, I tend to approach those as two different languages. And when that day comes, you'll still be able to install Python 2. So I'm not really too worried about that in the future. But anyway, so we have a no bootstrapping philosophy of not having to install anything to use Ansible. So there's a lot of older RHEL and things out there, and we want to keep managing them. And you guys run a lot of that stuff in your infrastructure, so it's definitely been important to us. Modules that we use heavily. So Ansible uses multiprocessing to handle forks and communication to all the remote nodes. We use Paramiko to do SSH. That was our original implementation. But there were some really good patches that came along to use OpenSSH about maybe a year and a half ago directly. So our connection plugin will shell out to OpenSSH instead. And we found that provided you're running a new enough OS, so if you're running Fedora, you're running Ubuntu, I think RHEL 7 should have this taken care of. Control persist in SSH teaches it how to leave connections open and reuse them, so it's a lot more efficient. And if you're using OpenSSH, you can also use things like your SSH config file, Kerberos, and all sorts of good stuff. So we've actually found native SSH works a little better than Paramiko, but Paramiko has still been very awesome for us for especially supporting those older control machines like an Enterprise Linux 6. We use YAML for our data formats, so PyYAML is big, JSON is big, obviously. Jinja 2 for templating, and obviously a lot of little stuff that everybody uses every day, like subprocess to make calls. So kind of moving towards the end of things, I'm going to leave a little bit of time open for questions. If you'd like to contact us for information or learn more, go to ansible.com. The documentation website is docs.ansible.com and should have everything that you want in terms of a module index and help and tutorials. and we're on GitHub as well, so you can kind of see some examples there. Our company Twitter, I'm our CTO, is at Ansible, which should be pretty simple to remember. And I'm Laser Llama on Twitter, which is only because all the good names were taken, but I'm not really sure what that is. Cool. So I also wanted to mention that we're actually hiring. So if you mostly hiring for our Durham, North Carolina location. So if you're interested in moving to North Carolina, we've got a pretty cool office at this like renovated warehouse complex that's amazing. But we're hiring for API, QA, user interface. We're using Angular, and working on the core project. So if you're interested, email michael@ansible.com with details, and love to have you working with us. I don't have, like I said, I don't have too many more slides. Kind of did direct you a little bit to the docs information, but if people had specific questions, feel free to shoot. And also, I did want to remind people at 6 we are doing the open space upstairs if people want to join us then. All right, thank you. Yep.
I have a quick question. I've been pretty disappointed with the configuration management tools because they're not transactional. So, for example, let me give you an example. If I'm dropping everything coming on input in IP tables, and there is a rule accepting SSH, and I update the rule accepting SSH, it's removing this rule, and I get logged out of my server. Is Ansible doing this? Because I found something called cdist that is doing this.
Yeah, so the little bit of question about contextualness, which I didn't completely understand, but when you, SSH is one thing, locking yourself out is a thing, but what I'd recommend with most people who manage IP tables is to write a template for it, and then that template can be shared between all your servers, and then what you can do is in your roles, you can say like, needs this port, or needs that port, and your template can key off that, and in that way what you're doing is declaratively, you're pushing down exactly the IP tables configuration you want. And the reason for that is that way you know that if somebody has logged into that remote machine and made a change, you've got exactly the configuration you want on the other end. So there's plenty of cases in Ansible like where I can surgically modify a file. There's a line in file module. There's an ini file module. Those kind of methods are great when you've got users that are interactively messing with the machine, but the sort of the ideal nirvana that you want to get to is where you can specifically manage it directly from just one point and know that that's the configuration you want. Cool, thank you.
Hi, could you elaborate a little bit more on how Ansible Vault works? It seems apparent that you probably use a two-way hash to be able to decrypt the file, and should we feel comfortable hosting these files on public GitHub repos?
Yeah, so Ansible Vault is doing, read the code by all means, is doing basically encrypt HMAC kind of stuff with basically a password that you need to know. So whether you want to leave it up on GitHub is kind of up to you. I'd probably consider maybe not doing that, but it's the main use case is so I've got an IT team, and I want to be like, hey, I don't want to expose this to all the necessarily the company or that kind of thing. You can definitely read through our application and see if you trust us and what you think. There's also been talk about extending it to also support GPG, which is I think is going to be probably a very interesting and compelling way to do that for a lot of people. Cool.
Hi, thanks. You showed how to do rolling deployment using batch. Does Ansible has any support for canary type deployment where you roll out like to say 5% of your fleet, look at metrics, if the metrics are good, like 1 hour after you then roll out like increasing amount of batches?
So the question about how do you do canary deployments, what you would probably do, Ansible has a -- limit specifier, where what you could do is you could run your play on a subset of your infrastructure. So if normally it was going to say target data center 3, you could say data center 3 limit rack 5, right? Or you could just pick a particular set of hosts. There isn't per se a run it through 5% and stop, which would be interesting, and I think it's something we might want to consider. But it's easy enough to template the host specification to where I can say, hey, I just want to run it on these servers and try it out for a while, and then I now want to run it on the full set. So not exactly, but hopefully that answers it a little bit. Cool, thank you.
Some of us, unfortunately, still have to deploy to Windows. Can you elaborate a bit about current and future support there?
Yeah. So question about Windows, right? So it's something that I want to do. It's something that we've been talking to a lot of people at, but to be honest, we've been overwhelmed with lots of open source contribution all over the place in Linux and Unix and so on. So we've been concentrating on kind of the core original audience to a great extent up until this point. I suspect if we do Windows, I really want to see an implication using .NET, desired state configuration, PowerShell, those kind of native things. I don't want to get into a situation where we have to necessarily install Python and an additional server on a Windows box. So we've been kind of taking the time to see where that's going to happen. But I don't want to give necessary dates because things can slide around, but that's something I would like to see very, very soon. And are talking to some people about those kind of things. So very, very good question. It's something I'd like to see as well. If anybody has particular use cases for like specifically things that they want to deploy in Windows, shoot me an email. Really like to kind of gather ideas as to what everybody's trying to automate.
Hi, you discussed the Galaxy, but also the fact that batteries are included in the core.
Mm-hmm.
What's the relationship there? Is there a path from Galaxy to core for roles?
Sure.
Things like that?
Yeah, so the relationship between Galaxy and Ansible core. So Ansible core contains modules. So those are very low-level pieces. So they're not super low-level, but I mean, you can kind of think of them as Lego bricks, right? These are the things that I would do, piece them together to build my application. Talk to Django. This user must exist in Postgres. This database must exist here. This EC2 load balancer configuration should exist. This file should have these permissions. That kind of level of granularity. Typically, the roles in Galaxy are using modules, right? But they're a layer up. So they're saying, here's the tasks that describe what modules we use. Here's what we run when we change behavior. These are the templates. These are the defaults. So they're an example of taking that Lego brick and kind of giving you the plans for a house, right? And they're saying, deploy this larger thing. So it's kind of a different level of granularity. There aren't any roles in Ansible core, but you can technically put modules in a library directory in Galaxy if you had some of your own modules that, for some reason, we didn't want to include in core, but you did want to share with other people. Cool. Thank you.
How does Ansible compare with specifically Fabric and Fab tools?
Yeah. So the question about Ansible as it compares with Fabric, so obviously if people like Fabric, please use whatever you want, and that's what I encourage anybody to do is give all applications a try. My idea with Ansible was I didn't want to have to strap Fabric or Capistrano on top of my Puppet or Chef deployment and learn two tools, right? So the idea that I want to fully configure my base OS and then fully deploy the application on top was something that I really wanted to do in one step. So Ansible provides all the modules and things you need to be able to deploy end-to-end straight to the bottom. The main difference, obviously, is you're not writing Python code. So like I said, I'd prefer to concentrate on writing the Python code for my core application and then just have a little bit easier descriptions of infrastructure. And another one might be the resource module approach. So the idea that I have all these modules that are familiar from a configuration management perspective to be able to say, here's the files with these permissions, these kind of things at a higher level, which I think they may be starting to do, but I'm not entirely familiar. But having those levels of abstractions kind of gets more done with less typing.
Hi. When working with a third-party role, is there an easy way to map the variables in that role to what I call those variables in my other roles?
Sure. So technical question. If you have a role that someone else wrote and they decide to use different variables, there isn't really a way to change what those variables are. But what you can do is if it's parameterized is pass your variables in. So for instance, if you had a parameterized role that came from another user and it takes a foo port and you call it database port, right? You could say foo port colon quote squiggle and then the variable and then assign that variable and pass it in.
Sure, so I could have that in my host vars or my group vars or something like that?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that last part.
I'd have that in my host vars or something like that, to map.
Yeah, so you would do it when you make the call to the role. So the roles I showed up here were just they didn't show any parameters, but you can actually pass parameters to the role on the little role command line.
Sure.
So you'd probably do it there. Cool, thanks.
Hi, I'm using Chef at the moment, and we use version pinning across environments to gradually roll out stuff. I was wondering if Ansible has something similar to that, or how you handle like gradually rolling out new versions of stuff?
Yeah, so it's more of a question about how to handle environments and how they differ?
Well, no, not the differences between environments. It's more about deploying new changes in a controlled manner. So staging is a bit ahead of production.
Sure.
But when that's ready, then we say, okay,
yeah,
this is ready for
I
production.
think that's kind of a general infrastructure as code kind of question, and we trying to think of infrastructure as data more so than code. But the idea would be, to me, is what I'd want to do is I'd want to keep every version of the product as a branch in my source control for my infrastructure as code or whatever data project. And then you model the differences between environment with variables. So your roles they may have a smaller inventory file, right? They may have some different parameters, like they might say needs database equals false or something, or they probably need a database, but get what it will. And then use branching to handle the differences in the stepping of the application, but keep stage and prod in the same repo so that they can closely track.
Okay. And fun fact, we use Ansible to drive Chef in some situations.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. So we hopefully play nice with everybody.
Two related questions. How do you deal with SSH errors and disconnections, that sort of thing? And can we operate like disconnected? So I start a deployment, close the laptop, or do I need to keep the laptop open while the deployment happens?
Yeah. So how do you handle with SSH connection errors? So there really isn't too much to handle something dropping midstream, but because there is, I don't like this word because it makes configuration management too technical, but there is the idempotence of the resource modules. You should be able to just rerun again where you left off, and it should finish configuring the rest of the way. So you are going to get an error. Ansible is a fail-fast system, so rather than going as far as it can and like, hey, I got an error, I'm going to continue down this leg of this acyclic graph, right? It's going to stop and make you fix it. And I think that's an important thing. But yeah, I would just rerun the playbook, and you would be there, and it'll give you a nice report. The other thing is that when Ansible hits an error, it generates a retry file. So you can rerun it using that retry file to just hit the hosts that have failed.
Hi, just a simple question. How would you check for compatibility? Let's say you have a server you installed a year ago, it's at a customer site, they've messed with it, and I want to know whether it conforms to what I put on it and how it conforms to what I want to put on it for upgrades.
Sure. If you're trying to tell if two servers are different, that can be a tricky thing. Ansible does have something called check mode, where what it will do is it'll run all the modules against the remote machine and only report if it would have changed something. Not all the modules in Ansible report check mode, so for the ones that don't, it's just going to say, I would have changed something, because it probably would. But it's sort of a good simulation, so it'll tell you if a config file changed, if it would have had to do any package updates. The other thing that you might want to do is just write a really simple script that like returns the versions or something like that. But in general, our approach is, say, become the state versus identify how things have drifted, and I think that's something that over time will change, and you'll see more in that area. Cool. Thank you. Outstanding questions. This is like the most technical questions I've seen out of any conference ever, so thank you very much. All right.
So Michael is actually ending under time. He mentioned their hiring, and I know the lab there because I have a friend who's doing a startup in the same underground there. So check out the place. And when can they meet you again? Something at 6?
Yeah, 6 o'clock. I think it's room 525.
Okay, room 525. Thank you very much, Michael.